another interview with an expert. And this time we have with us Matt Warner, CEO and co-founder of Blumira, to talk about how businesses can stay ahead of cyber threats during the summer months and why this quieter season might actually be the best time to strengthen their security defenses. So, Matt, it's the holiday season, and most employees are on annual leave, and things tend to slow down in many businesses. But as usual, security teams need to stay on high alert because these are the days when attacks really start to pick up. So, at a time like this, what does the cyber threat landscape look like for businesses and what should they watch out for?
Yeah, it's definitely, one of the big patterns that we see is a dip as we move into the summer months for exactly that reason. Everyone starts going on holiday, people start moving away when it comes to their work focus, and then it starts to pick back up as we get deeper into the year. And that kind of gives all of us in the IT and cybersecurity world the chance to kind of take a step back and look at what do systems look like? What does access look like? And making sure that we really get that chance to sit down and evaluate where we've kind of given access to our employees. And you get this really kind of interesting benefit where if someone goes away on holiday and comes back and they don't notice that you've changed their access, then you've probably figured out some pretty interesting ability of where were we over permissioning, where are we kind of going about it. But really, kind of most of all, you get that ability to kind of take a step back, evaluate what's happening in your environment, looking at your legacy systems, looking at where you're going in the remainder of the year, and starting to build that plan up. And a lot of that has to do with, especially if you are within, any of the areas of the world, which is a lot of places that at this point have some sort of geopolitical push. You want to make sure that you're getting ahead of the end of the year push that is going to come from threat actors, that is going to come from people that are trying to make money in ransomware. And really, the best way to do that is to just look at your environment. What are you exposing to the internet? Are you still using a classic SSL VPN? If you are, how is that kept safe? Are you using MFA? Are you using one of the platforms that tends to have issues lately, like SonicWall, FortiGate, Avanti? If you are, it's worth really kind of sitting down and taking that slower time to say, what is our process for when we do the patching here? How quickly can we patch? And if something weird happened here, would we know about it? So it's really kind of important. It all kind of comes down to what is the visibility that you have in your environment? And do you have that ability to kind of not only introspect and see if there's an attack, but really just know what's happening in your environment, to know how people are leveraging your environment, to know how people are connecting into it. And, depending on the type of organization, we see this a lot in manufacturing, but a lot in others as well. If you're the type of company that needs to share data, if you need to send data back and forth, if you expose FTP or SFTP, or if you have a managed file transfer solution that's sitting in your DMZ, now is the time to really evaluate that and say, is this secure? How are people bringing data into my environment? What kind of processes can I change to make sure that this is going to stay secure? Because those are the areas that as we move through the year, that attackers are going to look at and say, all right, what is exposed? What can I attack? And if I can't attack anything, what kind of phishing campaigns can I bring to bear to get these users to act and really start to move forward? So you get this nice benefit of maybe 2 or 3, maybe up to 4 months of time of what kind of work can I do to ensure that we have the proper coverage in our environment so that I know what's going to happen at these endpoints. And it could go all the way down to, let's say you have an employee with a laptop and they're off site. Do you have the ability to know if they click on a phishing link and something gets dropped onto that machine? That broad view is, and making sure you can contain those threats, and really less of the threats and more of what does that risk look like to you, and making sure that you have that conversation openly as a group before the whole kind of kickoff happens later in the year.
Okay. So, other than the usual phishing and scams that often come wrapped in holiday-themed, socially engineered tricks, we are now seeing more AI-powered attacks into the space. With that in mind, do you know any other types of threats that businesses tend to overlook during this period?
It's a good question. So AI powered attacks from the standpoint of good phishing has become a bigger problem for sure. For a long time, and in general, we heard people say or give the guidance of look for poorly written emails or look for an email that doesn't feel like it's written the right way. AI's allowed people to kind of step beyond that and be able to be more pointed about what they're doing. But in a lot of cases, the attacks that we're seeing across these environments are not different than they were 5 to 10 years ago. A lot of the actions that are being taken by these groups, while there may be some more sophisticated kind of air to the attack that they're going for, which is to say, like token stealing in Microsoft 365, which requires phishing, which requires someone to click on something and then authenticate, is a much more complex attack than just capturing creds like it would have happened 10 years ago. But the resulting impact is the same, which is to say your identity for, let's say, Microsoft 365 will be taken. They will leverage that to get deeper into the environment and potentially start making specific changes in that environment, which we know are the changes that are required by attackers. So in a lot of these cases, and the way that we like to look at this here at Blumira is that, security and attackers in many ways, it can feel like it is this magic that they have to break into people's environments and be able to do things that a lot of us don't look at as a potential way for them to break in. But in a lot of cases, they have to do some really specific things to be able to actually get into that environment, which is to say, someone is phishing, or they break in through token stealing, or they break in through buying the credentials for one of your employees. In either case, they're going to have to either bypass MFA or perhaps it's not turned on. And if it's not turned on, this is the perfect time to go get that turned on during the holiday season. And or if they are able to get all the way in, they're going to have to do a number of things like set up mail rules to make sure that if they're pushing mail into that account, that you won't see that mail, and making sure that they're getting what they need out of that account and then starting to break further into your environment. We see the same thing, of course, on the attacking the actual infrastructure, which is to say, there has to be motions made by these attacks, some sort of landing in that environment, making sure you have technology, a SIM, an EDR, something that's going to evaluate and detect when something is landing in this environment. And it could be your cloud environments, it could be your on-prem environments. AI will make it easier for them to develop kind of a structured campaign around your environment, and a lot faster to do it, but they still have to take the normal actions that an attacker would have to take. So when we look at kind of how this is evolving as we go through the season, and especially as it pertains to this holiday season, I would expect to see a push harder on geopolitical phishing and getting people to click on links, getting people to click on ads. Malvertising is a big one we often see as well along those lines, where people are on their holiday and or they have more time during the summer, so they're just searching for tools to kind of solve problems internally. And that can very quickly turn into the attacker knows that IT people want to search for a tool just because they need to do some work. The attacker sets up a fake malvertising site for advanced IP scanner, for example. We've seen this happen with. They download that and run it, and then they're hit with ransomware within the next few days. So there's this really interesting kind of ecosystem that's continuing to get built up by the attackers. And what they've learned is that leveraging the exact kind of period of time, as well as what's going on in the world, and leveraging AI to develop that content has really driven the ability to attack the user in a really, really robust way, which of course leads us back to how can you see what's happening within your identities and how can you see what's happening within your endpoints to ensure that you're really getting the ability to say, all right, I know that someone has attacked this endpoint today. I need to do something about it today instead of learning about it a week later when they get all the way into your environment.
Okay, great points mentioned there. You've also mentioned using this holiday period as a good opportunity for security teams to get proactive. How does that actually look like in practice?
So proactivity is really the best way to reduce threats in your environment, just broadly. Like being proactive, taking that chance to step back and evaluate what is happening is really the best way to stop threats broadly across your environment. Which is to say, you can't solve threats unless you know what the kind of risks are in your environment and you've gone through and have identified them and you've really taken that time to kind of talk about. And in a lot of cases where we see that going the best for organizations is sitting down and really kind of having a true tabletop conversation, which is to say, if you sit down as a group, maybe it's with your IT staff, maybe it's with who's available during the holiday, and saying, like, well, what if we were attacked today? What if this happened? What would we do to identify it? What would we do to stop it? Let's say the CEO got attacked today and they're on holiday. Would we be aware of this right now? And how far could they get into the environment? And, in our experience, having that conversation around what if this happened? What would we do? Ends up being one of the most important parts of identifying areas of risk in that environment, because that lets you really start to walk through it without it happening to you. You will never solve all the problems of risk while it's happening, but you will solve a lot of them. You'll identify a lot of those areas and you will identify how to really solve your problems if you can sit everyone down. And by everyone, I mean people who you usually wouldn't have in that conversation. It could be people at the executive level, it could be at the legal level, it could be at the people level or in finance. And just think about building a really simple, and using AI for this is perfect for non-threat actors, of all right, what if finance was attacked and they were able to get into the financial systems? How would we know about that? How far could they get into that environment? How could they have even gotten to this point? And that lets you really start to evaluate, what do we have from a visibility perspective? What do we have from the perspective of being able to stop an attacker if they are able to get into this point? And it lets you start to take that all the way to the top, which is, going back to the old ideas of defense in depth, of if we want to say we want to be able to see them at every stage of the potential exploitation that would come here, starting at phishing to the endpoint, servers to your cloud identity, and making sure that we're seeing it. The best way to do that is to talk about how that flow would look and then start to go through each of those pieces and say, all right, where is my monitoring? Do I have the ability to really identify these areas? And that could go from floor staff, it could go from inside of your factories, all the way up to your executive office staff. But in either case, all of these people have potential risks, and taking that chance to say, to really, when everything is slower, to sit down, have that conversation, and make sure that you've started to kind of iterate those risks, because that lets you then open up that, all right, we know we need budget. We're going to sit down in September and really start to figure out what we need to purchase later this year and next year, or change or modify to make sure that you have the best ability to stop those threats looking into the remainder of the year.
So, training employees and boosting their awareness during these times is really important,
Mm.
especially like helping them understand not only to spot phishing attempts, but also that if they fall for it, it's better to speak up, report it, and learn from it rather than staying quiet. So, how can security teams build a culture where people feel safe speaking up and turn those shared experiences into something that actually helps strengthen the organization's overall defenses?
It's a great question. So it's something that, over the years in cybersecurity, there's been so much, back and forth on, is it the user's fault? How do the users get involved? How do we make sure that people are enabled to be able to solve these problems? And in a lot of cases, you know, falling for a phishing attempt is just an inevitability in a lot of cases, because there's been a number of research studies over the last 10 to 20 years that show if there is a persistent phishing effort against your environment, within 7 to 10 tries, they will get anyone that they need to get, generally speaking. And a lot of that is because a human only has so much time. And if there's enough tries, and AI makes this much easier with LLMs, chances are one of those tries will land. So you really are always better off making sure people speak up is very important, and making sure that people have that path to speak up is important. One of the things that we've seen be very effective is being very open about what you've identified and sharing that with the broader organization, of like having if you use Teams or Slack, having a security alert channel where you can say, like, this is the kind of phishing that we saw today. This is what you need to look out for, and really turning it into a conversation with the actual organization to say, these things are real. This stuff is happening. Like here at Blumira, for example, we have an inside joke for whenever anyone gets a text about me asking them to buy gift cards. I'm never going to ask anyone to buy a gift card, but I can guarantee almost anyone who works at any company will get an email that says the CEO wants you to buy a gift card. Buy us some gift cards. And so it really is one of those things that requires open conversation. And security awareness training is important. All of these things are really important to kind of give people the tools they need to identify, like, does the domain look weird? Does the sender look weird? Did this come from an outside email you've never seen before? These are really important things to look at in your 365 and your Google Workspace, and making sure that you're turning on the features that allow you to identify, like, you haven't seen an email from this person before, and the easy security features outside the organization, that kind of stuff. But there's always the inevitability that people will fall for the fish because they must. It is just kind of the way people are. Like, they're busy, they're clicking on stuff. That's just the way it is. And blaming them for it is couldn't be more wrong. What's the most right thing, if that's the way to put this, is making sure there's open conversation, making sure you're sharing the phishing that's happening so people can actually identify what they look like right now. Because often, in the world of phishing, it's really easy in security awareness training to get caught in the pattern of, like, look at this crazy phishing email. But in reality, there's 20 or 40 different types of phishing emails. It could be a fake DocuSign. It could be a true phishing email with a link that's very specific to that person. We've seen it go all the way to the extent of um, phishing attackers mimicking family members of board members in different organizations. And, like, at one point or another, there will be people that fall for it because that's just the way it is. If it didn't work, they wouldn't fish people. So it really is important to think about not only making sure that people will report it, because you want to make sure you're really taking out that bottom level of phishing, but also making sure that if someone doesn't report it, you can identify that something bad is happening as soon as you can, and bring that back to that person and the wider team to say, hey, here's what happened. It's not anyone's fault, but here's what happened. Here's how it happened. Here's what we can look for in the future to make sure this doesn't happen again. And work with your vendors to make sure that they can help you identify those areas. It's really easy in the world of IT to have a whole bunch of vendors doing security stuff or IT stuff for you, and forget that you're allowed to ask them, like, how would you help me solve this problem in the future? Because this happened to me and I don't want it to happen again. And a lot of this is just making sure that you're pulling that time to detect up and identifying, when is this happening? Why did it happen? How can we make sure that people can speak up about it and talk about it? And that can be part of your security awareness training. But you're better off having this ongoing dialogue with your staff of, here's how it happened, here's what happened, here's who tried to attack us. And in a lot of these cases, I don't, from what we've seen, most people don't really expect there to be a persistent attack against their environment or their company. But because of AI, because of LLMs, because of kind of the expansive nature and the amount of money to be made in cybercrime at this point, it is a persistent effort at this point. So it's important for not only your staff to be open, aware, sharing that information, you sharing it back to them, because that's one of the things that tends to get missed in security, is not sharing that back to the staff, and ensuring that not only that that what they're looking for and they're doing as good as they can, but you're going to be there to backstop them, because expecting them to be perfect will never work. It just won't work. It'd be great if it could work, but it's not possible. And it doesn't matter if it's your CISO, your CEO, or your floor worker, all of them are equally vulnerable, and you need to make sure you're supporting them in that message.
Looking ahead, how do you think businesses can keep that same proactive mindset even after summer's over? What should they take from this season and carry it into the rest of the year?
If I could get anyone to do anything proactively throughout the remainder of the year, I would recommend regular, like, monthly tabletops with the different departments, which is to say, sit down with a different department as an IT or security team and go through one or two scenarios. Take 30 minutes. You don't need to take hours, but take 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and go through a scenario, which is to say, like, all right, we'll pick on customer success. All right, customer success. What would happen if a one of our customers sent you a file that ended up being a Trojan? Like, would you have opened the file? Would you have needed to open the file for your work? If you had opened the file and your host ended up getting hit, how would we know about that? And would we be able to make sure that we can move that detection up and really start to talk through the whole process of, well, what if we had to shut down our entire ticketing system because something happened? How would that impact customer success? How would that impact you as an organization? What would you do next if that happened? And really take every month as a learning opportunity for a department. And what that allows you to do is throughout the year, build up your learnings of the organization and really start to identify areas across all of it without putting too much time burden on them. Of here's where we know we have areas of risk. Here's how we can solve this area of risk or not solve it. It's not bad to identify that you have no way of solving risk because that at least tells you where the risk is. And it allows you to, as an organization, go to your leadership and say, here's what we know. We've talked to legal, we've talked to customer success, we've talked to finance, we've talked to our executive team. We have these areas of risk. We need to invest in this part, and we need to ensure that we're being proactive because we know if this happens, this will be the resulting impact into the organization. That tends to be the missing link for a lot of IT and cybersecurity, which is to say, it's really easy to point, especially for proactivity, to point at security, be like, well, we really need that thing, and to be pushed back on and said, well, do we really need that? And to be proactive really requires some amount of evidence to show that proactivity is important. And to get that evidence, the best way to do that is to talk to people and really have that conversation internally around how are you doing? What are you using? How would this impact you? If you got attacked and we had to shut things down, what would happen? We see this a lot here at Blumira from the standpoint of, let's say you're a retail company, you get hit, but you need that server up for the next 4 days because if you don't have it up, you can't process any sort of charges. And within those 4 days, you get hit with ransomware. Was that a good choice or a bad choice? It's going to depend a lot on the organization. But if you have to have that conversation during that attack, you will never come to a good decision. Having that conversation ahead of time, being proactive and knowing if we get hit, this will be the impact. What should we do? That organization, for example, could have sat down months ahead of time and said, if this happens, we will process them on paper, or if this happens, we will process them that way. What ended up happening was they got hit with ransomware. And a lot of that it was not to anyone's fault. It was because they had to make a decision in the moment, and that was the decision they made. So if I get any sort of proactivity into people, it'd be having that conversation ahead of time, having it with different departments, and making sure that when you go and ask for additional funds, when you go and ask for those tools to be proactive, that you know why you're asking for it and you can point to what the impact will be.
Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Um, Final thoughts. Probably the biggest one would be making sure, like going off what I just said as well, it's important that we all talk to each other in IT and cybersecurity. It's just as important that in IT and cybersecurity that we talk to the broader organization. We exist in IT and cybersecurity to support the organization. We are in service of the organization, which is to say we are here to make sure that everything is working the way that it should. So kind of going right back to the tabletops, make sure we talk to each other, make sure we know what we're doing, because making decisions, random acts of security, we'll say, doesn't help us be secure. It helps us feel better in some cases. But that's it really, if we can do anything this summer leading into the rest of the year, or the holiday season for a better way for those of you on the other side of the world, it really what's most important is us having that conversation and identifying where do we have that risk? What can we do to be better? And what is the impact going to be to the organization when we make these changes? And that could be doing better at patching. That could be doing better at making sure that we're reducing our attack surface. It could be just making sure you're doing more security awareness training and sharing that information. But in either case, it never hurts to share more information and be more transparent. Because in a lot of cases, most of these people will not be aware as to the work you're doing. And the only way to really expose that and to make sure that you're not going to have more risk is to talk about it.
Thank you, Matt. It's been a great discussion and lots of valuable insights were shared on how companies can prepare and respond to cyber threats during this time of year. Until next time.